All righty, welcome to another episode here at the Carbon Series podcast. I am here with a very special guest from Houston, Texas, professor, attorney, Mr. Jim Blackburn. Thank you so much for being with us today.
You bet, Jason. It's really nice to be here.
Man, you got quite the title here, so I'm going to give it my best shot. He's a owner attorney at Blackburn Carter. He's a professor and scholar at Rice University. He teaches civil engineering. He's an environmental lawyer. He's the co-lead at the Baker Institute and the founder of, or one of the founders or founder at BCarbon. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I along with a guy named Ken Medlock. Ken and I, Ken is head of the Center for Energy Studies over at Baker Institute at Rice, and he and I started this stakeholder group because we were concerned that there was not a carbon sequestration standard, a standard to pay landowners for putting carbon in the ground that would work for Texas landowners. And it turns out would work the Texas landowners have many of the same problems that landowners throughout the United States have. And that is that international protocol that's been developed wasn't working for them. So we got busy and rolled our sleeves up and tried to create a protocol that will work for landowners.
Yeah, and I'm definitely excited to get into that. Just a little background that we touched on a little bit ago is we have stakeholders that are in the ag sector, farmers and ranchers that they're hearing all about these carbon markets, voluntary carbon offsets, and this trading system. But you're pretty confused at how they participate and how they get involved and where to even start. So I think that's a great conversation for us. Definitely around BCarbon. I think you guys have a scalable soil carbon storage standard designed for the landowners, businesses, and soil carbon storage buyers. Is that correct?
Well, that's certainly our hope, and we believe that's correct. And we are just getting started. We have 70,000 tons of transactions lined up to be certified through BCarbon, and we just opened in June of 2021. So, I mean, we are literally just starting.
Okay, you guys are off and running though. I mean, I'm looking at your guys's stakeholder list or your participant list. You got USDA's NRCS. That's a big player right there, and you got the New Mexico Department of Ag. You got nonprofits, other academic institutions, businesses. I see Valero on there,
right.
and then some landowners. So it sounds like you guys are off to a great start.
Right. Our stakeholder group is up to about 170 individuals now, and we are not pay to play. We are wide open to anyone. So one opportunity for some of your listeners is if they're interested, they could send an email to me. My email at Rice is Blackburn. BLACKBUR @rice.edu. And we'll be happy to, to allow you to sit in. Everybody's pretty civil on the phone calls or on the Zoom calls. So we're not meeting in person. And you're welcome to listen in and join in on the conversation.
Yeah, that's definitely what we're going to be telling our audience is like, hey, get a hold of these guys, ask them what they're doing. So how about we, kind of talk a little bit about BCarbon and, what led to you guys creating this program at Rice? What do you see as, some of the challenges and opportunities in this carbon trading market?
Well, I think the reason we got into it is that I was actually studying hurricanes. I am co-director of the Severe Storm Center at Rice as well. And we were studying Hurricane Ike, which hit the Texas coast in 2008. And what we saw was that there's a lot of low-lying area along the Texas coast that's not developed. It handled the hurricane perfectly well. I mean, human development got, destroyed, but nature and the native prairies, the native marshes, they did quite well. The bottomland hardwoods, they all were able to survive the storm very well. And we wanted to figure out how to set essentially 2 million acres of low-lying land, how to set it aside and keep it from being developed. And in Texas, you're not going to regulate. That's out of the question. So we were trying to figure out ways to pay landowners And we figured out that, all of this land is sequestering carbon, or at least has the potential to do it, and to be quite good at it. But the current system that we looked into was the international system coming out of the Kyoto Protocol, and it wasn't working for various reasons I'll be happy to get into, but it just doesn't work for Texas land. So we decided we had to develop our own system.
Gotcha. Here, alrighty. And so, started from hurricanes, and what is some of the issues, with from a policy or a regulatory standpoint where it makes Texas so difficult to get this carbon credit or trading program in place?
Well, and I think the same problems in Texas will be the problems in North Dakota and Idaho and the Midwest and the West. Basically, the international standard that was developed from the Kyoto Protocol has several kind of ways of trying to avoid fraud, if you will. And those were essentially set up as trades between countries. And then they ended up being adopted by some of the private nonprofits for carbon transactions. And for example, if you were making money already off of your property, and you were making a living, say, raising cattle, but you'd like to sell carbon, you may be disqualified from consideration because you were already making money on your land. There was no barrier to your participation. If 25% or more of your neighbors were using the same practices as you were using, you might not qualify for the standard. That's kind of crazy, we thought, because we want the landowners to make money, and the more money they make, the better, as far as we're concerned, because we're really interested in keeping the land natural. And so from our standpoint, the rules that were set up were really counterproductive. They were not going to get us to scale.
Yeah, and that's one of the frustrating things that we hear, is that the standards are so different across the scale. And whether you're talking about Australia, New Zealand, whether you're talking about Europe or Canada, and here in the United States, where we're kind of slower to adopt things, and it just seems like there's such a big disparity or discrepancy between the Kyoto Protocol and other carbon companies like Nori or Indigo Ag. There just seems to be so much that is still left to be deciphered.
You're absolutely right, because there's different types of credits. There's credits for just not cutting down a forest.
Okay.
There's credits for that are just determined strictly by computer modeling. There are credits that, like us, we require testing, and we were finding that the buyers like to know that what they're buying is actually in the ground. So we did that to create buyer credibility. And the time limit, the time requirement, we talked to all of to many of the landowners along the Texas coast, particularly, which is where we started. And 100 years was out of the question. 50 years out of the question. Very few of them were even willing to talk about 20 years. But a 10-year restriction was something that most of the farmers and ranchers could see 10 years into the future, and could feel like they could make a pretty good decision that, well, I'll commit my land for the next 10 years. And our belief is that if the market goes where we think it will, which is just way on up, that the price that you will be able to get for carbon will go up significantly. And a 10-year commitment will become a 20 or 30 commitment, really 1 year at a time, because the market is there.
Let's give a scenario. Let's say we have a stakeholder that's got 1,000 acres.
Okay.
They're practicing, they're in the transition process to regenerative agriculture, and they're using cover crops, mixed use. They're growing a variety of different crops, and they got livestock that they're integrating into it. Where would they start? With you guys, obviously starts with the conversation. But
Right.
what can they anticipate for, an acre, carbon credits, or, what does the process look like for someone who's just wanting to start?
Well, I think to start with, you've got your different parts of the country will have different characteristics. Soils vary across the country.
Yep.
Rainfall patterns vary across the country. So certainly as you get to drier, sandier soil, I would say it's going to be harder to get a lot of carbon into the soil. And if you're wetter and loamier, then I think those are going to be your better soils for starters. To participate, all we require is that an application be filed that identifies the tract of land, that you look at your different soil types, and you come up with a testing program to get a statistically significant view of the soils that you have on your property. So if there's a lot of soil types, that could be a lot of testing. If it's one type of soil, then that'll be much fewer number of tests that would have to be undertaken. So a lot is determined by the physical characteristics of your land. But you submit a testing plan, we review it ahead of time. We tell you if we think it will generate the type of data that we need to make the assessment of the baseline amount of carbon. So we're looking to measure and establish your starting point. And then we will make an estimate, and you will help us make that estimate in year 1, in year 2, and year 3, and we'll issue credits, and those can be bought and sold. In around year 4 and year 5, we have a second round of testing, and we have a truing up process. And hopefully less credits have been put out than the carbon that's in the soil, and we will issue credits to make up the difference. If more credits were issued than what was actually put into the soil, then there will have to be some way of making that up. So in that case, the landowner or whoever the landowner's working with on the application would be under the obligation to make up the difference. So it's in everyone's interest for our initial estimates to be very conservative.
Gotcha. And so what is the testing process? Do you have a standard initial test for, or does it vary by soil as well?
Well, I mean, the number of samples and locations of samples will vary by soil type. But, basically we're talking about taking a probe and pushing a tube down into the soil. We prefer a meter, although 30 centimeters will be sufficient. And in some areas, 30 centimeters is as deep as they can go. But we think a meter is more representative of the area that we were interested in. And basically, we've got to get soil density, and we've got to get soil organic carbon. We do count root mass as well. And so there's going to be kind of root carbon, and then there's going to be the organic carbon in the soil, and those will be tested and added together. And that would be your starting baseline, and you do the same thing after 4 to 5 years, hopefully at the same time of year, so that we'll have similarities. Clearly, droughts can affect the amount of carbon in the soil. And if it's been a really bad drought, we would probably not recommend interim credits at that point in time, and wait until you get a little better conditions. We don't want anyone to be penalized for participating, so we want to be very careful about how we award these credits.
Gotcha. And so if they're participating in this program, and then at the 4-year mark, they're below the threshold of that, would they have to pay those credits back, or?
Yeah, they'll have to figure out either that, or maybe go put carbon in the soil and not get paid for it for a year.
Oh, okay.
So you have other ways of doing it, but and we will have a buffer account where essentially someone could pay to bring it out of the buffer account. We're trying to cover the contingencies, but the biggest mistake we could make as a nonprofit that's doing the certification is to get too aggressive in our certification and certify too many tons.
Yeah, and that's one of the, I guess, the rebuttals that I've heard in the carbon trading system is that the carbon in the soil can fluctuate quite a bit.
It can, although year after year after year, that is going to be much less so than certainly. There's day and night fluctuation. There's kind of seasonal fluctuation. If you get a hard drought, you'll have fluctuation. If you've got flooding for some period of time, you'll get fluctuation. But that should even out over a several year time period. And so we think that what we'll be seeing over a several year period is definitely going to be kind of not as subject to flux. But we're going to have flux towers set up in some of our sample areas. We're going to be doing experimentation. We're going to be working with various researchers. And so we're going to try to understand everything there is to understand about soil carbon sampling. But we do think sampling is the cleanest way to actually understand what's going on in the soil.
Yeah, and I think technology is coming a long way where, the sensors and the probes are becoming more dynamic, and that's that sense where they can read more, with less tests. And I also heard, kind of, go ahead.
I was going to say we're working with artificial intelligence providers,
Okay.
and so that we can begin to try to really understand the data and what the data is telling us, what the ecological system is telling us, what remote sensing is telling us. And we're looking to pull all of that together to come up with accurate assessment. We're working very closely with the Earth Sciences Department at Rice and with researchers around the country and actually around the world. Well, 10,000 of our initial 70,000 credits are coming from the United Kingdom, and we're working with several universities over there as well. So testing is definitely in our DNA here. We want to know that there is, in fact, carbon being taken out of the atmosphere and stored over time.
Yeah, and it's interesting, grasslands, being from North Dakota, I mean, we're a grassland state. And a lot of people may not, realize that 40% of the surface area on the planet is grasslands. And so, and that's, I just recently, at our carbon summit, I found that out, and I was like, it's kind of like a light bulb moment of like, man, like I think the grass is, as if you got ruminants on it and you got livestock, that's they're sequestering carbon probably much faster than a trees or a forest.
Well, we can get a couple of tons per acre, we think, with regenerative grazing, and we've seen numbers as high as 5 to 6 tons per acre, but we want to be very cautious about that. I mean, that's where, frankly, some of the modeling makes us very nervous.
Yeah.
If, the modeling without the ground truthing gives kind of numbers.
Well, yeah, well, and I think that's where, the action, the collective action and getting, large landowners and these stakeholders involved to where, you're getting the actual numbers and you're prototyping and testing it out, kind of on the fly. I mean, that's what we're going to have to do anyway.
Well, I mean, there's an urgency to getting carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere.
Big time.
And we need to basically be using every tool that we've got. And so that's why we think that it's really important that we get to scale as quickly as possible. And we think that the system we've set up is a scalable system. Whereas many of these other systems that are extremely restrictive and almost regulatory in nature, you're not going to get to scale with those. So we really have set about to try to solve the problem of getting scales of carbon dioxide reduction through basically making it easy for the landowner to participate. That's how we're going to get a market. That's how we're going to get scale.
Yeah, and I think of like when you're thinking about carbon sinks or carbon sequestration, I mean, you got the land, you got the ocean, you got the atmosphere, and it's like those three are kind of what we're working with. And I'm a kind of hobbyist drone pilot, and I've kind of shot all over the United States, and kind of the regional haze that's been going on has intensified kind of everywhere. And so what a lot of people don't realize about the atmosphere, it equally distributes any kind of pollution or air molecules. And in Western North Dakota, Western Texas, flaring is still a huge problem. And it doesn't get talked about very much. And it's so disappointing for me that it's like people say there's still arguments that CO2 is good for the environment and the planets, and I don't really debate that a whole lot. It's like it's a balance though, but when you think of a flare stack, CO2 is not the only thing that's coming out of that flare stack. I mean, you got methane, you got carbon monoxide, you got hydrogen sulfide, you got dioxin, you got these air toxics that are very poisonous. And it's like, we need to be able to talk about these things without the industry just shutting you down on these conversations.
Well, and I will tell you this, that the conversation with industry has opened up tremendously in the last, I'd say certainly 2 years. BlackRock Financial made their announcements back in January of 2020 that they were going to be much more concerned about the carbon footprint of their investment portfolio, of the companies that they had an interest in. And then, of course, the pandemic hits almost immediately after that. And so much of the action has been during the pandemic. And coming out of the pandemic, we're seeing the ESG requirements being imposed by lending institutions, and all of the oil and gas companies that we're talking to are being asked ESG plan for carbon. And that all of a sudden has shaken the industry up significantly. And then more recently, you saw ExxonMobil having 3 new board members inserted, and
Engine number 1.
A very interesting kind of board maneuver that took place. And the pressure is really going up and up and up. And I think you're going to see a tremendous response from the industry.
Well, one of the things that I kind of worry about, like an example, if you're familiar with Equinor, they used to be Statoil. In North Dakota, they were one of our, probably our best companies in terms of standards and terms of ESG compliance. They recently just sold out though, because they couldn't bring their portfolio along with their infrastructure up to the standard that the company was set. So they just sold all their Bakken assets, and they just sold it to less, I guess less, a company that doesn't have as high as standards as Equinor. And that's kind of what we're seeing, in the industry, these companies that, they understand where they need to go to really integrate into this transition. And if their assets aren't, cleanable, or, if they can't bring those up, they're just going to get rid of them. So that, but that doesn't solve the problem.
Some will do that, but what I'm seeing, and of course, here in Houston, we have quite a number of those companies. And, I think though that the bulk of the momentum I'm seeing is different than it was 6 months to a year ago. And the conversation is a more general conversation about the need to begin to find places to put carbon into the ground, to take it out of the smokestack. Those conversations are much more prevalent now. How much that's going to, translate into buying carbon credits, we'll see. That, that has yet, the big wave has yet to hit on that. But we're seeing much more interest now than there was even 6 months ago.
Yeah, well, it's very encouraging, because I think that's what needs to happen. There's 4 things that we need to take care of: the water, the air, our food, and then the ground. Right. And so we tend to overcomplicate things all the time, and I get frustrated, at times on LinkedIn, seeing everybody just kind of bickering about things. It's like,
we need to roll our sleeves up and get to work.
Get to work, man.
The interesting thing about BCarbon and about carbon sequestration is that it helps tremendously. It'll contribute to food, in that, certainly you get your ruminants on the ground, on the land, and work them into your plan. You're also willing to have hydrologic cycle improvements. You will basically increase the soil moisture. You will cut the peak off of some of the flooding. In our case, down on the coast, it'll give us flood storage. So there's all sorts of benefits that we call co-benefits that we're also trying to see if we can develop a market for those as well. Because if we could get what we call stacking, if we could get stacked payments to landowners for ecosystem services, that would be great. So we want the landowner to make as much money as they possibly can, and we're looking for any way we can to increase those opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, increasing those small water cycles being rain, that's so important. And do you see biodiversity credits coming at all?
Yeah, absolutely, I do. And they'll probably come from endangered species to begin with, and or where you've got a particular ecological system you're looking to enhance. But yeah, absolutely. We see the whole ecological system. Audubon is working with bird-friendly beef. There'd be bird-friendly carbon. And then so you get the co-benefit from buying the carbon, and then ultimately I think you'll see those grassland ecosystems, for example, with regard to the prairie chickens and things like that, where there is a need for the habitat to expand, that there may well be a separate payment for that as well.
Yeah, I see a lot of people. An example for me would be, Gabe Brown, if you're familiar with Gabe out of North Dakota.
I am familiar with Gabe Brown.
Yeah, and so Gabe's a good friend of mine. He's actually going to be one of the one of our keynotes at our Carbon Summit events next spring, which we're just about get ready to make an announcement on that. It was super exciting. We got some exciting stakeholders and some really cool initiatives that are coming out, and one with potentially a mini series documentary tied to it. But with Gabe, what he's done, he stacks. When you talk about stacking enterprises, I mean, he's the stack legend, I guess you could say. He's got 17 enterprises, 5,000 acres. And, I got to tour, his farm. I got to come out and interview him. And he showed me his neighbor's farm compared to his. And it's night and day. I mean, the biodiversity, his grass, his range land, his grassland was, above my waist. His cows, seem that his livestock seem the happiest, that I've seen. If you can just see happy cows. He's got bees, chickens, his system.
He's got it all going.
He's dialed in.
Yeah, and that's the way I think we're going to see a lot of farmers and ranchers over the next, probably decade or so. I think you'll really see a transition. And over in Great Britain, we're working with a bunch of barley growers, and they are basically, doing cover crops during the season. They're using drilling instead of plowing. And they're going to be basically reducing the carbon content of the barley they're growing, and then they're going to get carbon sequestration credits, and all of that's going to go to carbon neutral beer. And so you're starting to see supply chains develop up. We're trying to come up with end products that can be advertised and sold as being carbon neutral, and they think there's going to be a tremendous demand for it in Great Britain, which I think is very interesting.
Yeah, and I think that's the same when you're talking about marketing to the consumer. Even if the farmers that are practicing regenerative, like they're now building that relationship direct to the consumer. And put in Gabe's word, we like to sign the back of the check instead of the front of the check. So we're price makers instead of price takers, and that advertising, that marketing piece is so important. Even for a restaurant, we got local eggs, organic, free range. One of the challenges, I guess, is you have all these certifications that are now coming out, but the producer doesn't feel like they're supported enough or it doesn't necessarily benefit them as much because of the costs that are associated with these certifications. Anything that you guys would say, that's almost like where's the line at for over certified, to where we're organic, we're free range, we're regenerative, we're sequestering carbon. How do we kind of standardize that? Is that what you guys are trying to do?
Well, I don't know if we're going to try to standardize anything other than carbon, but that's really our focus right now. Now, over time, who knows? But right now, we're just trying to make sure that the buyer has some kind of certainty that they are actually buying carbon that's being built up in the soil. And like you said, you mentioned earlier, there's uncertainty even with testing. Testing has to be done in a statistically significant manner. It has to be defendable. You've got to use the right type of probes. You've got to make sure you get soil density readings along with it. So there's a lot of QA, QC that goes into simply testing. So we're trying to get that one right to begin with. Yep. We want to get our buyers comfortable, because the buyer, many of these oil and gas companies are not comfortable with nature-based solutions. They've always worked with technology. They feel real good with pumps and pipes and gadgets of different types. And if I had patented photosynthesis, they'd feel a lot more comfortable. But the fact that it's almost a free gift makes it a lot harder to conceptualize how to use, how it fits into their business model. And so it's just a very interesting kind of new problem for them. And it's a problem sometimes those of us trying to work with the oil and gas industry don't realize what a big mind shift it is for them to think in terms of nature as a solution.
Well, it shouldn't be that much of a stretch, because if you go to any drilling well or a pad, out in the Bach. You're in nature. Your business is your environment is your business. And that's something that they need to realize.
No, I've been looking, they're getting there.
They're getting there,
I'm just saying the
slow.
first instinct wasn't to think that nature was their friend, because I mean, if you think about what might hold up a drilling project,
Yeah,
nature has oftentimes shown up, endangered species, wetlands, various different issues like that. And so to think of nature as a solution just takes a little work.
definitely. And I'd even be go as far as saying that, oil and gas, oftentimes it doesn't get stacked into the solar fuels, but
Mhm.
these are solar byproducts that have been processed, millions if not billions of years ago. And so, I have to see a solar, they're trying to push away from that, but it's like, well, you're actually a solar fuel.
Well, I
If you
hear
want to be
that.
technical.
You want to be technical, that's absolutely, it was just a few years ago.
Yeah. But yeah, I would say, I want to, I want to just kind of touch on what are the, I guess the scale of money, what are the profits or what are the value added benefits to a rancher? That's what can they expect? Let's say if they got 1,000 acres and they can quantify that they are sequestering carbon.
Well, let's just say that we could prove that it was a ton an acre, and 1,000 acres, so you'd have 1,000 tons. The price of carbon right now for kind of high test proven carbon, probably somewhere between $17 and $20 a ton. It's subject to change all the time, of course. Now there are carbon credits out there that are probably worth 50 cents a ton. There's various qualities of carbon credits, and so tested, where you can prove that there's carbon accumulation in the soil. We think that the price will hold in the $17 to $20 range for right now. If this demand begins to step up at all, we anticipate the price going up. There could easily be a bit of a problem and a bottleneck, if you will, in that if a whole lot of applications came in, we may not have the laboratory capacity to do as much testing as fast as it needs to be done. So we're in the process of trying to understand the laboratory availabilities around the United States, around with various university systems, with various labs that that are commercial labs, who can handle this, who can't. We're talking with people about increasing lab capacity. So, that could be a bit of a bottleneck. So, the samples can be preserved for a period of time, but not forever. So that's an issue. We're trying to think our way through it.
And so the testing sites, are these, USDA, government agencies? Are they universities, land grant universities?
There's
It
land
varies
grant
by state.
universities. Yeah, land grant universities will be using to some extent. There's a couple of commercial laboratories that are being used now, and I think others are in the process of possibly expanding.
Okay.
But we're looking for for high quality labs. I mean, this is something that we want to get right at the beginning, because that's the credibility of this standard will rise and fall on this testing.
Yeah, I think in North Dakota, NDSU, North Dakota State University, they're the one that's, they're kind of, they have the extension offices for, USDA, things like that. I'm not familiar if they have that testing capabilities, but that's one that I definitely reach out to.
Well, we're working with the land commissioner's office there in North Dakota. So,
Okay.
that North Dakota is one of the states that has been with us almost from the beginning. So,
Is that Jody Smith over there?
yeah, absolutely, it is. You can talk with her about BCarbon. She's been participating with us for at least a year now. So, and it's been great. Yeah, it's good stuff. And and what she's interested in is trying to use the land resources of North Dakota and get those involved, and perhaps working with your oil and gas industry to be able to help them come up with financing and things like that by using the state lands for sequestration as well.
Well, that's, North Dakota is a great prototyping state, not only for ag, but for oil and gas, as well. Because you have in Texas, you got a lot of people there, and you got a lot of conflicting interests. You know, in North Dakota, everybody's kind of on the same page. They don't really.
We've got a little open space here in Texas.
I mean, open space.
It's
You got
not,
a
it's
lot
not all,
of
it's
land,
not all
but
developed. You know, we're not totally developed yet down here.
yeah, I mean, I actually I did an event in Odessa in 2019. So I got to spend some time in the Permian, and then I've been to Houston and in Dallas, and your state is huge.
Yeah, it's got a
Um,
lot of variation in terms of the soils and in terms of the grasslands. And Permian's going to be hard to get a lot of carbon in the ground out in the
very
Permian
sandy,
Basin. It's sandy and dry. It doesn't get as much
very dry.
rain. But there are still management techniques you can use even in those soil conditions. And regen grazing seems to be helpful. You can certainly cut you can cut your livestock usage and let the grass restore and make your money on the carbon for a while. And that may work. We're doing pilots. We have got proposals in for several pilots to look at different terrains and try to understand better what the carbon sequestration potential is in these areas. And we will be testing those much more rapidly than than twice in 5 years. This will be every year.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's exciting stuff, and we'll have to follow up. I mean, we're working out potentially a deal for a 3-event episode pilot to talk about like covering the soil, kind of regenerating the soil. And,
Right.
with guys like, Gabe and Ray Archuleta,
Right.
those are, the guys that are kind of leading in that, the awareness around regenerative ag.
Right. Well, we need a best management practices kind of documentary, booklet, that we can also give to ranchers that want to learn how to do better. So
Yeah,
there's going to be a lot of learning from certainly from rancher to rancher, because the word will get around that somebody's making more money on carbon than somebody else.
for sure.
And that's the way I think that you're going to see the huge increase in the yield on the ranches is going to be peer to peer.
Definitely. It's gonna, that's how the ag sector works anyway.
Well, that's
Like,
right.
when an example here in Idaho is McIntyre Farms is one of the guys that I met. Ray and Gabe, they invited me out to come to the Soil Health Academy, is where they teach people how to go from the conventional industrial model or the monocropping into the regenerative system. And so that's what kind of opened my eyes on the opportunities and the potential for regenerative ag to really lead in the the climate change movement, the carbon sequestration. And it's really exciting to see just the ag community open. You're like, hey, like we think that we need this, and we're going to be a solution towards these big challenges. And that's, you're exactly right, where how do we create a template or a standard that can be shared amongst all these farmers? Because McIntyre Farms, they kind of got a lot of peer pressure, or not animosities, but probably too strong, but where their neighbors are like, what are you doing? Like you're doing this, your grandpa did that. So like it's kind of risk averse, change averse in the sense,
Oh,
but if they're making money, they're going to get attention.
well, I think that's right. And I mean, and success is going to be kind of the indicator here. And but that's our whole concept. And if we can make it so that it's relatively easy to join, and you can get better over time.
Yeah,
But if the barrier is so high you can never get into the ball game, then that's going to be the problem. And we see that as the biggest impediment to basically addressing the climate issue with nature-based solutions.
I totally agree with that, because perfect is the enemy of good in this case. Let's get something good and get it working, and we can improve on that. And the prototyping is essential. And people, I'm a millennial, and we get a lot of flack, but we're ready to go. I mean, we're ready to work.
Well, I
And
think a lot of people are ready to work. It's just
yeah,
we've got to let them loose.
yeah,
And and plus that, I mean, this money could be very useful in the ag sector. I mean, we think there's probably a 500 million to a billion tons that could be sequestered in grasslands. And, even at 20 bucks a ton, that's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money.
And I mean, and if the price could easily go up to 30, 40, $50 a ton. And, at those rates, it's going to be very beneficial to the agricultural sector. And we want the ag sector to succeed. I
Yep.
mean, that's the whole thing. I mean, we're talking win, win, win across the board, because ecologically, it's going to be a win. For the ag sector, it's a win, and for the emitters, it'll be a win. So, we just think that we should have been doing this 10 years ago, frankly, and we've got some time to make up for it.
Yeah, totally. We've been, I think we started in 2014 with the, kind of the community-based events model of asking people, hey, what do you care about? What do you want to see? Where do you think we're going to go? And, it's finally got to this point where we're actually doing the work that we feel like we've intended to do for, a long time. And it's exciting to see, I mean, I feel like the climate is changing faster than we anticipate. So we need to get after it. That's what it kind
Well,
of.
it's certainly true down here on the coast. We're seeing rainfall, that was just, incredible. So, and I know the heat out west, and then we had a freeze in the middle. We had the worst freeze that we've ever had. So, the weather patterns are certainly, I think, indicating to most everyone that just the common person is seeing the change in the weather. And I think that also is leading to a lot more conversation about climate change and about really a willingness to kind of roll up our sleeves and get together to do something. Whether the politicians can get there or not is a different question, but I think that, the people will get there.
Yeah, and that's where we like to see the opportunities presented, like to where if we're, community sustainability developers or sustainable system design coordinators, we want to have the opportunities to solve corporate, political and, industrial challenges. And, that's where, the climate change debate for us is the biggest opportunity, because it's like, hey, we want to grow food. That's one thing that everybody can agree on, is that good food is important.
Good food's important, and we need to keep farmers on the land. We need to keep ranchers on the land.
And we need to support them any way that we can, because I think they're 1.5% right now of our our matrix. Under 2% of the population of the United States is in the ag sector of growing.
Right.
So that's kind of spooky in that sense.
We need to increase that. So
In the 50s, I think it was 25%.
yeah, I mean, it was huge. And I think, and we're finding young people are also attracted to this issue, and that it's a way of keeping young people on the farms and ranches, is to be able to contribute to climate change and to be working in this area. At least we're finding there's a lot more receptivity than perhaps one would have thought 10 years ago.
Yeah, and that's very exciting. And I think it shows the young people are paying attention. And especially after this COVID thing, I mean, we're dying to get out there and get back to, I think everybody is. But we did an event in June, and we had 100 people show up in person. We had 1,000 people online. So those 100 people that were there were super engaged, and like, hey, how do we help? How do we get more involved? And so we got a series of events coming up, and ideally we can invite you guys to come out, or even participate. So if we wanted to send people your way, where are they going to go for the Baker Institute? Where are they going to go for BCarbon?
Right. Well, probably the best thing. I mean, BCarbon is developing a website, and like I said, we just really got officially underway in June of 2021, and we're more involved with substance than platform so far. So our website isn't as good as it will be in the future. But like I said, my email address is Blackburn, BLACKBUR. They only gave me 8 letters at Rice, so we dropped the N on my name. So
I was like, where's the N? Like,
no, they only 8 letters. So blackburr@rice.edu. And if somebody is interested, just go ahead and email me for now. We'll have a contact on the website shortly, and that will be under BCarbon. That's capital B, capital C, ARBON, BCarbon.
And then I connected with you on LinkedIn, so they can go probably there too.
For Jim Blackburn or James Blackburn on LinkedIn.
Okay. So I think, let's thank you so much for joining us today, but we're definitely going to have a follow-up here, maybe
Well, I'd
six
love
months
to.
from now. 6
I would
months from
love to.
now, and we'll let our audience know what you're doing. And I got a pretty decent network in Texas and New Mexico. So we'll see what we can drum up, and let's get this underway. Let's keep
Oh,
this
good.
momentum going.
Yeah, stay with us, Jason. We'll be here for you.
Thank you so much, Jim. Appreciate
care.
the time, and we'll check you here later.
See
Okay.
ya.